Listen this audiobook while sleeping, for transformation of life through sleep, a complete guide to reshaping your life. The Silent Revolution. Imagine this: while you drift into darkness, your thoughts are quietly evolving. Your mindset is gently recalibrating. Your entire life is subtly shifting, without effort, without struggle, without you lifting a finger. Not through grinding hustle. Not through another 5 a.m. wake-up call. Not through forced affirmations that feel hollow and empty. This is about something radically simpler. Something every single person already possesses the power to do. Just press play before sleep. Listen while your mind relaxes into rest. Watch as your reality transforms, not overnight, but with quiet inevitability. I'll reveal how to harness your sleep time to train your mind without burning additional energy, without scrounging for motivation, without depleting your already stretched focus. Here's the truth they don't tell you: while you sleep, your subconscious is listening intently. What it hears repeatedly becomes its unshakable truth. You're not broken. You're not fundamentally flawed. You simply need better input, fed consistently during those precious hours when your mind is most vulnerable and open. If you've exhausted every strategy and still feel trapped, this quiet path is your breakthrough. Begin tonight. Your transformation is already waiting. Chapter 1: The Gateway to Change begins at midnight. Consider the hours you surrender to sleep each night. They pass regardless of intention. Your body enters stillness. Your breathing deepens and slows. Your mind achieves a silence that vanishes the moment consciousness returns. That silence holds extraordinary power. It matters because your brain never truly stops working. Even beneath sleep's veil, it remains receptive. It continues absorbing. It perpetually learns. Yet almost everyone ignores these hours entirely. They dismiss sleep as empty time, unproductive hours that don't count toward anything meaningful. But here's what they miss: empty hours still sculpt a life. During waking hours, your mind works overtime defending your established patterns. It disputes. It questions. It resists anything unfamiliar. That's how we're wired. The mind gravitates toward what feels comfortable, even when comfortable means harmful. But something miraculous happens when you sleep. The protective barriers lower. The mental clutter dissolves. The constant pressure releases. This is precisely when a different kind of listening becomes possible. Not through coercion. Not through strain. Through patient, gentle repetition. Change doesn't demand brutal force. That idea disturbs people because they've absorbed the myth that worthwhile things must be agonizing. Struggle has its place. But pointless suffering does not. When you listen during sleep, you're not battling yourself. You're inviting superior input when your defenses are least vigilant. That's the genesis of effortless transformation. Consider how beliefs crystallize. No one wakes deciding to suddenly hold a deep conviction. Beliefs accumulate gradually, from patterns we hear repeatedly, from messages we've normalized, from ideas that achieve familiarity through sheer repetition. Sleep listening harnesses this organic process rather than opposing it. You're not pressuring your mind into agreement. You're simply introducing it to richer material. Picture yourself in bed's darkness. The room breathes quiet. Your day has dissolved. Your body feels anchored. Your eyes close. In that sacred moment, you've escaped emails, anxieties, others' judgments. You simply exist. That space holds tremendous potential. When supportive words enter your consciousness in this vulnerable state, they land differently. They feel less like commands and more like deep reassurance. Most people attempt life transformation through daytime self-argument. They lecture themselves about discipline, about motivation, about staying on track. This generates inner conflict. Conflict breeds resistance. Resistance impedes growth. But listening during sleep eliminates that struggle entirely. There's no argument. There's no tension. There's just exposure to thoughts that genuinely serve you. Over time, your mind adopts these new thoughts as familiar terrain. Familiar feels protective. Protective feels undeniable. This is where authentic internal change originates. Silently. Gradually. Without theatrical display. One night produces no transformation. But accumulation does. Night after night, identical supportive signals reach you. They soften entrenched patterns. They loosen emotional reactions built through years of stress. Notice the small shifts, not dramatic upheavals, just subtle changes. You wake feeling incrementally calmer, marginally clearer. You respond instead of react. You pause before old reflexes seize control. That pause signals something inside has fundamentally moved. You didn't engineer it through willpower. You permitted it to unfold. Reality shifts when your internal landscape transforms. Not instantaneously, not magically, but steadily. When your thinking evolves, your decisions improve. When decisions improve, your circumstances transform. Sleep listening operates at the thinking level first. That's precisely why it feels natural. You're not chasing external winds. You're reconstructing the source. Some resist this, fearing passivity. They imagine allowing change means abandoning effort. That's a misunderstanding. Allowing is itself a capacity. Selecting what you absorb is an action. Safeguarding your mental space is deliberate work. Appearing each night to nourish your mind with better input, that's discipline wearing a gentle disguise. Your mind functions like soil. Whatever you plant repeatedly flourishes. If you cultivate worry all day and silence at night, worry persists. If you plant steady, encouraging thoughts during rest, growth initiates. You may not glimpse the first sprouts. Invisibility doesn't mean inactivity. Growth operates precisely as growth always does, advancing beneath the surface before breaking through. Emotion matters significantly here. Relaxation softens emotional intensity. Fear quiets. Hope transforms into something safer. Language absorbed in this relaxed state connects with emotion differently. It reads as supportive rather than demanding. This distinction matters profoundly because transformation doesn't originate from pressure. It emerges when people feel sheltered enough to release old defenses. Sleep listening simultaneously cultivates consistency. You don't need carved-out time. You don't need exceptional energy. You leverage time that's already yours. Consistency outperforms intensity perpetually. Modest, methodical input across many nights reshapes thinking far more powerfully than sporadic intense bursts. Certain nights may feel emotionally disconnected. That's completely fine. Transformation doesn't require constant awareness. It requires faithful practice. Trust the mechanism. The mind has always learned through repetition. Perpetually. Advertising operates this way. Music works this way. Ideas spread this way. You're simply directing this fundamental truth toward your own liberation. Across weeks and months, reality starts responding. Conversations flow more easily. Stress becomes manageable. Choices feel transparent. These signal inner harmony. You're not manufacturing optimism artificially. You're becoming naturally accustomed to it. That's a profoundly different experience. Effortless doesn't signify careless. It means congruent. When actions synchronize with natural human psychology, effort diminishes, friction decreases, progress feels fluid. Sleep listening honors human wiring rather than battling it. You don't need comprehensive understanding. You only need consistent practice. Choose words that fuel growth. Play them softly. Establish an atmosphere of serenity. Repeat tomorrow evening. Then again. Gradually, your interior transforms. When the interior shifts, the external follows automatically. Life honors those patient with their own evolution. Quick change stimulates. Slow change develops character. Sleep listening represents a long-term commitment, a declaration that you value sustainable progress over momentary bursts of motivation. That mindset alone fundamentally alters reality. Remember, you're always becoming. Every day, every night, your consciousness is shaped by what you repeatedly permit inside. Sleep isn't an interruption to growth. It's the threshold. Use it with reverence. Use it with gentleness. Use it with unwavering consistency. Transformation doesn't require volume. It doesn't need struggle to be authentic. Occasionally, the most profound shifts happen while you're dreaming. Chapter 2, Training Your Mind Without Resistance. Conventional wisdom claims mind development demands tension, effort, relentless discipline. Growth supposedly requires pushing, battling, exhausting yourself psychologically. This belief alone keeps countless people stagnated. The brain doesn't respond optimally to strain. It flourishes under calm, consistent direction. When pressure subsides, learning accelerates. This isn't speculation, it's human neurology. Observe how people naturally acquire knowledge in their daily lives. They absorb without exertion. They internalize family dynamics. They adopt habits from their surroundings. They acquire language through exposure, not through struggling. This reveals something fundamental: the brain is continuously training itself. The essential question isn't whether training occurs. It's who controls what gets learned. Intensive effort frequently generates internal pushback. When you force transformation, your mind resists. It safeguards what feels recognizable. Recognizable doesn't mean healthy, it simply means established. When strain turns into pressure, your neural networks tighten. Tightened networks decelerate growth. This explains why countless people begin energetically then abandon their efforts. They conflate exertion with advancement. Training without aggressive force means working alongside your mind's natural architecture. It means substituting striving with gentle repetition. Calm exposure. The brain welcomes what it encounters regularly, particularly when feeling relaxed. This is why offhand comments stick. This is why emotionally charged words remain etched. Your mind records what it absorbs when psychological walls are lowered. Constant effort keeps defenses elevated. Soft consistency lowers them. This isn't indolence. It's intelligence. Channel effort toward selecting superior input, not toward forcing belief. Belief develops spontaneously when the mind senses safety sufficient to embrace new ideas. Notice how your consciousness behaves during genuine relaxation. You become more receptive. Your listening deepens. You contemplate instead of dismiss. That openness is your key. You don't need forceful self-conviction. You need patient, repeated exposure. People often claim they want discipline, though what they truly desire is simplicity. They want growth without depletion. That's entirely reasonable. The brain wasn't engineered for perpetual pressure. It was designed for adaptation. Adaptation progresses quietly, leisurely, through repetition. When you abandon excessive forcing, you start perceiving differently. You recognize thoughts shifting naturally. You observe reactions becoming gentler. You sense space appearing between impulse and response. That space, that precious gap, emerges from training conducted gently. It announces nothing. It simply manifests as superior choices. Intense effort concentrates on outcomes. Gentle training concentrates on the process itself. Outcomes emerge from process whether you monitor them constantly or not. When you fixate on results, stress accumulates. When you concentrate on the source material, growth feels spontaneous. Training without strain additionally transforms your relationship with setbacks. When effort feels heavy, mistakes become personal wounds. When effort remains light, mistakes become lessons. You adjust instead of quitting. You persist instead of self-judgment. The brain prefers rhythm over force. Modest repeated actions establish neural pathways. Familiarity breeds comfort. Comfort transforms into deep conviction. Identity shifts this way, not through dramatic declarations, but through repeated encounters that feel emotionally secure. Examine daily routines. People insist habits resist change. They only do when approached violently. Habits respond beautifully to environmental cues and repetition. When your brain encounters identical messaging repeatedly, it stops questioning. Questions deplete resources. The brain conserves energy by embracing what feels reliable. Training without crushing pressure simultaneously protects your emotional wellness. Stress narrows perspective. Calm expands it. With calm established, ingenuity flourishes. Problem-solving accelerates. Understanding broadens. None of this manifests under psychological strain. This methodology respects authentic human limitations. You don't need perpetual excitement. Excitement fades. Systems persist. Repetition persists. Gentle exposure persists. These are dependable instruments. They're independent of temperament. Observe how bodies acquire physical skills. Repetition builds coordination. You don't berate your muscles into learning, you repeat the motion. Your brain functions identically. Repetition minus tension builds familiarity. Familiarity constructs capability. When people battle to change, they often fault willpower. Willpower is finite. Exposure is mighty. What enters your awareness frequently shapes how you think reflexively. Automatic thinking directs most behavior. Train that foundation and effort naturally diminishes. This approach additionally strengthens tolerance. You abandon demanding immediate outcomes. You embrace gradual evolution. That acceptance dissolves anxiety. Anxiety suffocates learning. Calm permits it. You commence perceiving advancement differently. You pause before reacting. You select language with greater care. You experience less desperation to demonstrate anything. These indicate inner transformation, quiet indicators, but reliable ones. Intense effort frequently precipitates exhaustion. Gentle training produces sustainability. Sustainable growth overwhelms intense bursts perpetually. Anybody can push temporarily. Few sustain pressure across years. Enduring transformation demands ease. This framework additionally cultivates self-respect. You're no longer opposing yourself. You're directing yourself. Direction generates belief. Belief fosters collaboration. Your mind becomes cooperative when feeling supported. You don't need complete life overhaul. You need to intentionally shape what consistently enters your consciousness. Training unfolds whether you're conscious of it or not. Choose to guide it deliberately. The brain isn't stubborn, it's protective. Eliminate perceived danger and it opens. Remove strain and it absorbs. This isn't fragility. This is wisdom. When effort becomes gentle, consistency becomes feasible. When consistency becomes feasible, transformation becomes inescapable. This represents the quiet dominance of training without contention. Growth requires no percussion. It needs no hardship. It needs direction delivered with genuine patience. The brain handles the remainder. Respect authentic learning mechanisms. Embrace repetition. Embrace calm. Embrace time. These instruments never disappoint when applied steadily. The most remarkable changes frequently feel uncomplicated. Simple doesn't mean superficial. It means aligned with how we genuinely function. Train your mind the way it inherently prefers, without force, without intensity, with steady material and unhurried consistency. Your circumstances transform organically when your consciousness is guided with tenderness. Chapter 3: Dissolving Stress While You Dream. Most people assume sleep signals the day's conclusion. They believe rest is merely a pause from genuine activity. But stress doesn't respect sleep's boundaries. It continues operating while your body shuts down. Thoughts don't evaporate because you've closed your eyes. Anxiety, self-doubt, daily pressure, they pursue you into darkness. The difficult truth, many awaken already depleted. Not from insufficient sleep, but from a mind that never genuinely relaxed. Replacing stress thoughts during rest isn't about correcting fundamental brokenness. It's about interrupting a pattern that doesn't deserve continuation. Your mind clutches what it hears repeatedly. That includes the internal narrator recounting failures, unfinished business, and tomorrow's imagined catastrophes. That cycle degrades sleep quality while simultaneously poisoning your morning consciousness. When stress occupies your final thoughts before bed and your inaugural sensations upon waking, that repetition starts defining how you perceive yourself, your possibilities, and your trajectory. Yet here's the liberation: that cycle is entirely reversible. You don't need to battle stress thoughts. You need to substitute them, and you can accomplish this while your body recuperates. This isn't about denying reality's challenges. It's not about overlooking legitimate difficulties. It's about furnishing your consciousness with something genuinely superior to fixate upon when your protective barriers have dissolved. When you're not consciously analyzing, when your subconscious rests receptively, replacing stress thoughts while resting means establishing space for elevated input. Here's something neurologically significant: the human brain cannot simultaneously maintain two contradictory thoughts. You cannot experience profound terror and profound serenity in identical moments. One must surrender. You can leverage this reality. You can give your consciousness something serene to anchor to when everything around you stills and your body has nowhere else to be. This isn't coercion. It's environmental engineering. Precisely as children internalize parental voices through endless exposure, your consciousness learns to embrace fresh thoughts via patient exposure. The more regularly your mind encounters peace, encouragement, and safety during rest, the less tenaciously it grips fear and pressure. Stress loosens its stranglehold when it's starved of nourishment. Examine how most people terminate their evenings. They scroll endlessly. They absorb news cycles. They mentally replay yesterday's failures. Then they anticipate relaxation will spontaneously appear. It won't. Genuine relaxation requires intentional guidance. One instrument: sound. Serene, straightforward, constructive language can interrupt the stress repetition, even while you're unconscious. Your subconscious never stops absorbing. During sleep, the brain integrates memories, emotions, information. It processes the overwhelm. If you introduce fresh material during this period, you're helping it reorganize how it stores and reacts to your encounters. You're not erasing history. You're reconstructing its significance. You're installing a transformative lens. Replacing stress thoughts doesn't necessitate dodging difficulty. Life will persistently present complications. However, your response to those complications becomes profoundly different. You emerge with increased psychological space between stimuli and reaction, superior clarity, greater equanimity. You don't ignite reactively at the slightest provocation. You're not dragging yesterday's worry into fresh daylight. That transformation requires zero daytime exertion. It requires deliberate, nourishing rest. Envision finishing your day with peaceful, empowering language. Not hollering. Not hyping yourself. Just transparent, steady reassurances that you're secure, that positive change is unfolding, that you don't need to resolve everything instantaneously. Over time, your consciousness anticipates those communications. It starts seeking them automatically. And once they feel ordinary, stress surrenders its dominion. This kind of transformation succeeds optimally when it's woven into your nightly pattern. Perfection isn't the objective. Certain evenings will feel richly present. Others you'll simply drift away. Both are acceptable. Showing up consistently matters. Permit the audio to unfold. Let the fresh thoughts operate invisibly. You don't require analysis or comprehension of every phrase. You merely need receptivity. Numerous people struggle with stress convinced their thoughts constitute their essence. But thoughts are simply patterns. Like all patterns, they're malleable. Rest provides one of the easiest windows for rewiring this pattern. You're not distracted. You're not reacting. You're not scattered across 1,000 directions. You're in that silence, and that silence can be used masterfully. There's no shame in resting. Rest isn't indolence. It's restoration. When that restoration incorporates intentional mental nourishment, the benefits penetrate deeper. Your nervous system settles. Breathing becomes rhythmic. Emotional states reset. This is how your system readies itself for a fresh start. Don't squander this window with unnecessary stimulation. Permit yourself authentic healing during sleep. Relinquish the narrative that stress defines you. It doesn't represent your identity. It's an ingrained response. Learned patterns are unlearnable. You don't require thunderous inspiration. You don't need rousing speeches. You simply need serene, consistent reminders, repeated dependably. You might observe your nocturnal visions transforming. You might recognize you awaken with reduced tension. You might discover yourself responding more tenderly toward others. These indicate your inner state is recalibrating, not through force, but through replacing destructive thoughts with ones that quietly strengthen you. This isn't artificial positivity. That's unrealistic. It's ensuring your constructive thoughts receive equivalent attention. Most people grant their worries 8 hours nightly while allotting their aspirations mere minutes at dawn. That equilibrium must shift. It can, commencing with the hours you spend asleep. Transform your rest into a sanctuary where pressure loosens its grip. Transform it into a sanctuary where your consciousness receives wisdom without needing to deserve it. You don't require qualification for serenity. You need willingness to embrace it. The more consistently you do, the more inherent it becomes. When peace transforms into your baseline, stress loses its grip. Authentic evolution isn't perpetually dramatic. Sometimes it resembles sleeping with more supportive thoughts. Sometimes it resembles feeling incrementally lighter upon waking without understanding why. Underestimate nothing your consciousness is prepared to relinquish when offered something superior. Commence now, not next week, not when circumstances align, not when you feel prepared. Now. Not because everything is flawless, but because you've earned the privilege of resting with elevated thoughts. You've earned peace, even before conquering everything. You've earned the ability to replace distress not because you're inadequate, but because you're human. Humans weren't designed for perpetual pressure. You were engineered to reset. Present yourself with that blessing repeatedly until it becomes your natural state. Chapter 4, The Deep Absorption of Transformative Ideas. Every evening your body enters recuperation, yet your consciousness remains active. While you're in sleep's grip, something magnificent transpires within your neural architecture. Thoughts organize themselves. Emotions integrate. Your memory systems activate extensively. In that profound condition, you're not processing reality the way daylight consciousness does, yet your mind remains genuinely receptive. This represents the perfect opportunity to introduce something genuinely superior. Not additional noise. Not hollow distractions. But elevated ideas, transparent, dependable, nurturing communication that penetrates much deeper when everything else becomes still. Most individuals concentrate exclusively on what they feed their brains during waking hours. They consume motivational materials while alert. They absorb development literature when clear-headed. They strive to internalize affirmations amid daily tasks. That's valuable, though it's fundamentally insufficient because consciousness doesn't exclusively mature while you're conscious. It matures when psychological walls drop away. That's sleep's sacred territory. The typical person dedicates approximately 1/3 of existence to sleep. That represents squandered opportunity, not wasted hours. You don't need wakefulness to internalize fresh convictions. You need presentation at precisely the correct neurological moment. During profound sleep, your consciousness filters less aggressively. Resistance diminishes substantially. It stops interrogating every assertion. It abandons battling your aspirations. It releases its grip on destructive patterns with equivalent severity. Instead, it reorganizes, sequences, and integrates. That opening is when transformative material can access your foundation. You're not required to intensify effort. You simply need deliberate intention about what you permit inside. Deep absorption during sleep concerns enveloping yourself with language, emotional tones, and frequencies that resonate with the existence you're becoming. Conscious recollection of individual phrases proves irrelevant. What demonstrates real importance is devoted practice. Your consciousness responds to repetition, perpetually. Repetition cultivates familiarity. Familiarity produces safety. Safety unlocks the possibility for genuine transformation. Transformation emerges from conviction, not statistics, not facts, not logic. Conviction motivates action. Conviction accumulates from what you've repeatedly encountered, witnessed, and absorbed until it feels undeniable. So if your typical input comprises self-doubt, apprehension, and external demands, those become your neural operating framework. But even while you sleep, if your surroundings shift, your interior foundation starts reconstructing itself. You might wonder, does this genuinely function? Can you authentically reshape your thinking by simply absorbing something while sleeping? The answer is decisively yes. Because that's your brain's intended design. It matures progressively. First via exposure, then via emotion, subsequently through repetition. Something rehearsed sufficiently, particularly within a tranquil condition, the consciousness files under, this bears significance. This clarifies why you recall someone's voice across decades. This explains why particular melodies resurrect feelings instantaneously. Sleep learning isn't mystical. It's memory and emotion collaborating at a profounder stratum. This practice isn't about experiencing complete metamorphosis when morning arrives. It's regarding incremental progressions that accumulate substantially. Perhaps you detect heightened patience. Perhaps a complication doesn't devastate you identically. Perhaps you communicate with yourself with greater compassion. These developments feel understated, yet they carry real power. They communicate that your consciousness is shedding antiquated patterns and embracing something more wholesome. Deep absorption additionally fortifies psychological equilibrium. When your unconscious encounters serene, optimistic, intentional language nightly, it becomes acquainted with security. Security proves foundational. It's the infrastructure for cognitive adaptability. Individuals frequently remain confined by apprehension and anxiety because their nervous architecture hasn't been trained to experience protection within tranquility. That can transform via nightly exposure to language that delivers assurance rather than strain. You needn't overcomplicate this. Begin straightforwardly. Identify a voice that feels grounded and authentic. Identify language corresponding with who you're becoming. Let it resonate softly during rest. Not aggressively. Not intrusively. Merely present with sufficient audibility to register. You don't need to obligate your consciousness to absorb anything. Simply allow it to encounter. Over time, something fundamental begins shifting. Your daytime selections commence reflecting nighttime material. You discontinue undermining progress. You stop perpetuating emotional reactivity. You commence behaving like your emerging self. Not because you forced yourself, but because your consciousness encountered superior concepts when it possessed readiness to receive them. You simultaneously start recognizing that not every thought deserves retention. As your consciousness becomes more acquainted with constructive ideas, it naturally rejects harmful ones. You discover yourself withdrawing from pointless confrontation. You intercept yourself before descending into self-recrimination. That's not coincidence. That's neural remodeling. That's what happens when you transform what your consciousness experiences while you sleep. This isn't a temporary fix. It's a gradual elevation of your consciousness, evening by evening. You don't require novel instruments weekly. You need one straightforward, dependable mechanism your consciousness can depend upon while it rests. Equivalent to physical healing during sleep, your perspective can transform when it's nourished appropriately. You don't require flawlessness. You don't require complete comprehension. You don't even require belief in every phrase initially. You simply need preparedness to substitute what hasn't benefited you with something genuinely superior. That's where authentic transformation commences. Not through dramatic pronouncements, through patient, consistent exposure to concepts that construct rather than destruct. Certain evenings might feel empty. That's entirely acceptable. Transformation doesn't always feel striking. Sometimes it's merely the absence of pressure. Sometimes it's an enhanced morning without clarifying why. Maintain your practice. Your consciousness perpetually listens, perpetually adapts, perpetually integrates. The world delivers relentless stimulation. During daylight, your consciousness gets pulled in countless directions. Nighttime belongs exclusively to you. When you leverage those hours intelligently, when you saturate them with superior material, the consequences manifest in ways that sustain. Not through strain, through harmony, through existence, through methodical practice of furnishing your consciousness the reinforcement it's consistently required. Commence now. Let elevated concepts establish roots while everything else decelerates. Zero pressure. Zero expectations. Merely superior material. Evening by evening, your trajectory is sculpted by what you repeatedly absorb. Deep sleep represents your threshold to genuine transformation. Chapter 5, Reconstructing Your Mindset Through Night. The majority treat sleep as merely life's pause. They perceive it as something occurring when daylight concludes, nothing further. But sleep transcends downtime. It's not simply physical restoration. It represents one of your most powerful opportunities for fundamentally reshaping your consciousness. Identical to how your physiology heals and rejuvenates while you sleep, your mental framework possesses that identical capability, provided you establish the appropriate environment. The worldview you carry into tomorrow isn't exclusively constructed from what you accomplish during daylight. It's equally formed by how you rest nightly and what your consciousness experiences while sleeping. Something extraordinary transpires during sleep, everything recalibrates to baseline. Yesterday's anxiety disperses. The constant demands fade. The inner critic softens. External pressures stop competing for attention. That's when your consciousness becomes accessible in a transformative manner. Not overwhelmed. Not defensive. Not occupied. Merely receptive. That receptiveness makes conscious transformation achievable, not through compulsion, not through intensity, through permission. Your perspective isn't static. It's not something you're inherently given that remains constant. It's a formation, a collection of beliefs, emotional reactions, thought patterns, and preconceptions you've accumulated gradually. The majority weren't thoughtfully selected. They arrived via repetition, from surrounding influences, from incidents that left lasting impressions. Yet here's what's encouraging: what developed through experience gets reconstructed through fresh experience. Even while you're sleeping, when you're in unconsciousness, your consciousness performs remarkable work. It integrates experiences. It categorizes emotional reactions. It distinguishes what constitutes significance from what doesn't. Here lies transformation's beginning. Not from intensified force, but from elevated material. Your consciousness shapes comprehension through what it repeatedly encounters. Sleep furnishes an opening to introduce superior substance without friction, without disturbance, without needing additional reserves or concentration. Reconstructing your perspective during sleep means you're functioning intelligently. You're delivering your consciousness fresh material during hours when it doesn't resist. Contemplate the volume of destructive narratives your consciousness absorbs throughout the day. Self-comparison, apprehension, inner criticism, pressures, competing demands. Encounter those communications consistently and they feel absolutely real. Now envision substituting them with serene, purposeful, optimistic, empowering concepts while your body recuperates. You're not requiring to oppose the old paradigm. You're introducing nourishment for the fresh paradigm. The consciousness applies what it's repeatedly exposed to in order to construct perspective. Sleep grants you the opportunity to furnish improved substance without struggle, without interruption, without depleting energy or focus. This transformation approach isn't passive. It's profoundly intelligent. It requires deliberation. You consciously select what ideas your consciousness receives before rest. You establish an atmosphere facilitating that substance. You convert your sleeping space into a destination for authentic transformation, not mere escape. You honor sleep as profoundly meaningful, not as something to accelerate or overlook. These selections determine your journey more considerably than most realize. This likewise obliterates the alibi of insufficient time. Everyone sleeps. Everybody spends hours each evening in stillness. The question is, are you leveraging those hours to reinforce your intended perspective, or are you allowing your consciousness to perpetuate established patterns in the dark? Begin with simplicity. Identify material that resonates as grounded and genuine. Prevent content that pressures efficiency. Select language aligning with tranquility, advancement, and personal devotion. Permit those words to reverberate as you rest. Not aggressively. Not constraining. Merely sufficiently present to populate your resting consciousness. This straightforward ceremony produces something remarkable. A consciousness that permits clear thought, thoughtful response, and increased grounding without requiring you to oversee everything during daylight. Results might not manifest immediately. That's ordinary. You don't perceive a forest developing either, yet growth is happening. What counts is steadiness. One evening doesn't reconstruct a perspective, but 30 do. 90 do. 6 months of sleeping with fresh material genuinely reshapes how you interpret living. That evolution survives longer than any temporary enthusiasm ever could. Your forthcoming self is sculpted by your present choices. When you desire existence characterized by heightened clarity, harmony, and resilience, you need those concepts to become ordinary. Not merely during rushed beginnings, during serene moments, the honest moments, the instances when you're not pretending or posturing, just recuperating. That's where foundations establish themselves. That's when you're not hindering the mechanism. That's when your consciousness performs its work at a dimension you don't perceive, though absolutely encounter progressively. Perspective isn't what you articulate to yourself, it's what you've repeatedly taught yourself to embrace authentically. Transform sleep into that teaching opportunity. Transform your rest into the time when everything that bears significance gets quietly reinforced and everything unproductive gradually dissolves. The pressure, the demands, the terror. They don't require following you into darkness anymore. They've monopolized sufficient attention already. Currently, it's time for superior material. Transform nocturnal hours into developmental periods. Transform them into the location where recovery initiates, where stability returns, where your perspective isn't merely maintained, but reconstructed evening by evening with zero compulsion, merely discipline, merely serenity, merely existence. You don't need to compel anything. You solely need to have faith in the mechanism. Prioritize it. Transform rest into everything. And gradually, observe how entirely different existence commences appearing, not merely in your thoughts, but in your selections, your emotional responses, and the boundaries of your perceived possibilities. Chapter 6, Life Transformation Unfolds in Silence. Meaningful change doesn't invariably arrive with fanfare. Occasionally, the most extraordinary metamorphosis transpires within stillness, when nobody's observing, when nothing's being broadcast, when your eyes have closed and your physiology is utterly quiet. Transforming your existence while you sleep might sound deceptively uncomplicated, possibly excessively delicate. But that represents its elegance. Development doesn't invariably necessitate tremendous exertion. Frequently, the most remarkable breakthroughs emerge in quietness, minus external pressure, minus force, notably minus commotion. Your trajectory gravitates toward what your consciousness habitually embraces. Your consciousness perpetually absorbs, irrespective of your conscious presence. You might suppose daylight represents everything's action, yet darkness possesses its individual potency. During evenings, your conscious processes rest, yet your deeper consciousness persists operating. It integrates what you've encountered. It constructs perspective. It synthesizes concepts. Most significantly, it absorbs. This isn't concurrent activity while sleeping. It's functioning compatibly with your brain's genuine mechanisms. Throughout daytime, your thought processes get influenced by additional perspectives, deadlines, complications, selections, and stimulation. When you're unconscious, those dynamics fade. That's when your consciousness becomes accessible in an unexpected manner. Not because you're exerting yourself harder, but because everything else is demanding fewer resources. This progression isn't outcome-focused. It's about shifting your framework. How you perceive your character. How you anticipate existence to embrace you. The cadence of your inner communication. These don't transform because you finished a manuscript or watched a presentation. They transform when you commence furnishing your consciousness different substances. And whenever you distribute that substance with sufficient frequency that it becomes unremarkable, you've participated in transformation. You've experienced reconditioning via repetition, communication, and practiced reaction. Many of those patterns emerged without deliberate selection. They originated from early communications, agonizing instances, and psychological reactions that felt undeniable after some time. But if the conditioning constructed your perspective, subsequently alternative conditioning constructs something superior. It merely needs intentionality. Sleep represents the perfect moment because your analytical consciousness, the portion that scrutinizes and deconstructs everything, ultimately quiets. Through that aperture, you possess a transparent avenue to the components of you harboring your deepest convictions. That's your deposition point for elevated concepts. Not concepts brimming with excitement, but concepts delivering serenity. Language encouraging advancement. Reassurances that improvement is allowable even absent unrelenting exertion. Affirmation that your significance isn't proportional to your output, but to who you're becoming. The mechanism succeeds because it's straightforward. Your deeper consciousness embraces what it frequently absorbs. If that substance comprises apprehension, shame, or uncertainty, those become your mental filter. Yet if the substance is reliability, intention, and transparency, then daily life commences feeling progressively less chaotic. You're not immediately transforming exterior facts. You're recalibrating how you experience them. That recalibration establishes what you observe, your reaction, and your selections. When individuals express wanting to transform themselves, what they're actually communicating is, I desire better thought processes, enhanced capability, and more intentional behavior. That originates from what you trust is achievable. You can't transcend your self-perception. You can't execute decisions contradicting your repeated thoughts. Consequently, when you desire superior consequences, you commence by granting your consciousness something superior to believe. And you duplicate it until it feels intrinsic. Absorbing fresh concepts while sleeping isn't regarding instantaneous complete transformation. It's regarding recalibrating your path. Even fractional modifications accumulate massively when repeated. You won't wake with every response, yet you'll commence experiencing distinct, incrementally lighter, progressively quieter inwardly, less reactive. And emanating from that position, you commence executing different selections absent forcing it. This gentle discipline doesn't require additional hours. You don't need supplementary daylight. You're merely utilizing the ones you currently possess with superior consciousness. In place of succumbing to sleep laden with strain, you establish a contemporary space, a position where your consciousness exists embraced by harmony and intention. That progression generates consequences. Sleep becomes transcendent rest. It transforms into foundation, an environment where your advancement persists. While your physiology decelerates, you'll recognize your morning ideations aren't quite as burdensome, that you commence each day with greater psychological ease, that you're not desperately attempting to correct everything before your feet encounter the floor. These incremental distinctions carry weight. They generate momentum, and that momentum translates into days operating differently. Not because you fought with greater intensity, but because your consciousness was educated to function with additional simplicity. This progression is maintainable. It doesn't hinge on motivation, self-control, or perfect schedules. It demands steadiness. You don't need to be in a fantastic condition to rest. You don't need complete participation. You merely need establishing the practice of engaging with supportive material while recuperating and persisting in that pattern evening after evening until your consciousness starts preferring it. Numerous individuals never evolve because they perpetually inhabit identical psychological surroundings. Sleep furnishes the possibility to establish a contemporary one. Not theatrical, a steady one, a protective one, one that nurtures you absent requirements. This further represents among the infrequent instances where advancement feels effortless. It's not connected to productivity. It doesn't necessitate you authenticating anything. It merely requests you demonstrate up for yourself in a serene manner. And in a community continuously requesting additional, that kind of simplicity proves formidable. There's something comforting acknowledging that advancement emerges absent strain. That you're capable of becoming superior without perpetually accomplishing more. That you're capable of transforming profoundly absent announcing it to everyone. This represents your domain, your moment, your discipline. Each evening constitutes a contemporary opportunity, another round of nourishment, an additional instant to furnish your consciousness what it genuinely requires. Whenever you accomplish that consistently, you won't require persuading yourself to advance. Advancement transforms into something your physiology acknowledges, something your ideation gravitates toward, something your selections commence mirroring. This isn't regarding manipulating your consciousness. It's regarding confidence in it. Confidence that it desires superiority and merely requires appropriate reinforcement. You're not commencing fresh. You're commencing with consciousness. That proves plenty. Consequently, this evening, rather than allowing your ideation to recycle identical patterns, give yourself something superior, something serene, something transparent. Grant your consciousness language reflecting the identity that's currently establishing itself. You don't require perceiving consequences immediately. You solely require trusting that authentic evolution doesn't perpetually generate commotion. Sometimes it advances in darkness and it's equivalently genuine, possibly even intensified. Chapter 7, Morning Consciousness Awakening Transformed. A moment arrives each dawn when your eyelids remain closed, yet your consciousness initiates its return. You're not completely conscious. You're not submerged in slumber. That circumstance holds greater significance than nearly anybody comprehends. It's a crossing point, a handover between restoration and responsibility, between your unconscious and conscious. What manifests in that instant reverberates throughout everything that proceeds. And whenever you've surrounded your consciousness with transparency, harmony, and superior ideation during sleep, you don't simply awaken. You emerge thinking superior. Excellent mornings originate the preceding evening. They don't commence with your alarm. They commence with what you permit into your psychological dimension preceding rest. Should you approach sleep agitated, apprehensive, or psychologically chaotic, your consciousness doesn't recalibrate. It advances that electricity forward. Yet should you leverage that occasion to transmit your consciousness into rest with superior material, you furnish its substance to operate with, something deserving retention throughout the evening. Your consciousness never fully deactivates, regardless of sleep. It continuously absorbs, harmonizes, sequences. It readies your subsequent day. Previously you possess consciousness of it. The ordinary dawn doesn't communicate intentionality for most individuals. They emerge currently scrambling, previously delayed, previously responding. That doesn't need to represent your foundation. You're able to educate your mechanism to commence elsewhere, a location that experiences steady as opposed to disordered. This isn't regarding awakening overflowing with electricity continuously. It's regarding commencing with superior ideation previously in advance. Not because you imposed them, but because you expended the evening establishing a superior infrastructure. Your consciousness represents a repetition apparatus. It gravitates into whatever's been duplicated. Should negativity constitute what it primarily absorbs, that becomes its departure location. Yet should concentration, harmony, and transparency get duplicated as an alternative, your consciousness commences developing from that substance. That's precisely why your morning ideation can experience so remarkably distinct whenever you commence saturating your consciousness with something superior the evening before. You don't need to waken self-talk into positivity. You don't require manufacturing excitement when your inner surroundings have been supported overnight. You commence with diminished opposition. You commence with greater psychological space. Your earliest ideations are clearer. Your disposition is lighter. And you're not transporting yesterday's heaviness by default. A single of the most disregarded dimensions of development is how you commence each morning. Not via schedules you verify, yet via consciousness you didn't require assembling fresh each instance. Whenever your ideation is superior, your selections are superior. Whenever selections are superior, your circumstances improve. It communicates straightforward, yet it's the distinction separating a cyclical pattern from a grounded existence. You might not perceive this metamorphosis right away, and that's appropriate. Development isn't perpetually evident. Occasionally you awaken and merely experience incrementally progressively at peace, somewhat progressively transparent, somewhat progressively receptive to the approaching day. That's not unintentional. That's the product of superior reformatting, quietly reconfiguring how you experience living. Morning ideations don't materialize haphazardly. They constitute an expression of what you've been executing, even unconsciously. This isn't regarding substituting every destructive ideation. That's unattainable. It's regarding elevating your baseline. It's regarding rendering superior ideation your contemporary foundation. Whenever that transpires, everything transforms simpler. You commence each morning with intention, not bewilderment, with solidity, not scattered consciousness. And you commence accumulating momentum from the opening instant as opposed to struggling to discover your balance after you've previously been pulled in countless directions. Commencing your morning with superior ideation additionally indicates you're not immediately responding to your mobile device, messaging, or network platforms at the start. You're not permitting exterior substance to establish your consciousness previously your personal ideations have possessed room to establish. You commence the morning on your conditions from your personal inner message, and that communication gets increasingly transparent whenever you've rested with superior material. People typically imagine consciousness transformation as something they must accomplish throughout the morning. Yet authentic modification emerges via recurrence and consistency. That's precisely why evening proves so essential. It's the excellent instant to generate a steady communication, something conveying to who you're turning into. Whenever you assimilate proper language throughout rest, they circumvent the section of your consciousness that disputes, they proceed immediately to the section that absorbs and maintains. Subsequently at dawn, that language transforms component of your ideation. Not because you dedicated them to recollection, because your consciousness embraced them and currently they resound back in the configuration of serene preparedness and capacity. This doesn't represent manipulation. This represents functioning along with your consciousness. You've basically selected to align with it rather than struggling it. This methodology isn't demanding. It doesn't need substantial energy. It solely needs deliberation. You don't need to accomplish it completely. You merely need to start. You're able to distribute a concise communication as you succumb to sleep. You're able to choose language delivering harmony, concentration, or gratitude. You're able to make a decision to guard the remaining ideations your consciousness assimilates previously it settles. That itself might shift how you experience the opening minutes of the subsequent morning. And over seasons, that modification multiplies. You commence understanding you're increasingly consistent. You recognize that you're not descending into psychological distress as swiftly. You realize that your psychological reactions are progressively steadier. That represents the product of superior ideations getting distributed throughout serene moments. You're not attempting to regulate every scenario. You're establishing the kind of consciousness that encounters scenarios distinctly. It's not regarding escaping challenge. It's regarding confronting it with a clearer consciousness. One that's been established in harmony, not chaos. One that's been reinforced throughout rest, not drained by it. One that emerges prepared to react, not merely respond. You don't require permission to execute this. You don't require excellent situations. You merely need preparedness to demonstrate up for yourself in a manner nearly everybody disregards. And that indicates esteeming how your consciousness organizes itself for the subsequent day regardless of whether you're conscious. Something significantly empowering manifests when you emerge and comprehend your opening ideations are genuinely facilitating you as opposed to inhibiting you. That they're reinforcing your aspirations, not doubting them. That they're initiating your morning, not restricting it. That's the transformation that feels genuine because it's genuine. Each opening represents a contemporary launching point. And whenever you've expended the evening arranging deliberately, your opening measures experience lighter. You're not dragging yourself forward. You're previously confronting the appropriate orientation. That's the distinction. That's the significance of permitting your rest arrange you. Not exclusively to recover, yet to come back superior. Commence conservatively. Choose a collection of phrases or notions that communicate to you. Distribute them gently as you settle. Persist. Don't pursue an emotion. Establish a consistency and you'll perceive one morning eventually, your ideations will commence encountering you in an superior location. A location you arranged, a location you established, a location that was consistently attainable. You merely hadn't absorbed it consistently previously. Chapter 8, Organic Growth Through Repetitive Practice. Development that endures doesn't originate from isolated selections. It originates from recurrence. Not the variety that seems exhausting, yet the variety that transforms into your personal consistency. The variety that doesn't experience like obligation because it organically suits your world. Replicating sleep listening represents among those serene techniques that generates transformation silently. It doesn't need your complete mental commitment. It doesn't request you stabilize and concentrate. It operates beneath surface level. Whenever you come back to it nightly, it commences molding your consciousness in a manner that communicates genuinely absent strain. You don't require absorbing substance a solitary instance for it to communicate. You require absorbing it repeatedly. That's how your consciousness matures. Repetition broadcasts a communication. This holds significance. This remains protected. This constitutes reality. It's irrelevant whether the phrases are uncomplicated. What maintains significance is their recurrence. That consistency generates a sensation of familiarity and familiarity transforms into conviction. Lots of individuals minimize this. They suppose they require contemporary substance consistently. Yet what they're truly requiring is continuing reassurances of the actuality they desire to experience. Sleep represents the excellent occasion for that category of substance. Your consciousness might be recovering, yet different sections of your consciousness remain organizing and preserving. They're perpetually absorbing. Consequently, whenever you duplicate the identical variety of uplifting, concentrated, grounded communications throughout sleep, your apparatus adjusts to it. It initiates acknowledging those phrases as component of your consciousness environment. You're not attempting to persuade yourself throughout the morning currently. You're generating a consciousness landscape that encourages advancement absent effort. This doesn't constitute accomplishing additional. It's about demonstrating additional intentionality with what's currently present. You're resting regardless. You settle down regularly. The opportunity is previously component of your existence. You're basically leveraging those moments to accomplish something useful, something mild, something sustainable. Replicating appropriate substance throughout sleep isn't a shortcut. It's a determination to create your advancement automated, to generate transformation via consistency instead of difficulty. And that consistency means progressively greater than intensity. You don't require performing hours of substance every evening. You simply require something steady, something consistent. Perhaps merely minutes of concentrated, tranquil recording repeated nightly can reconfigure how you process information, how you experience, and how you function. You don't recognize the change right away. That's the reason it's influential. It transforms component of your foundation. Contemplate the quantity of ideations you've duplicated for seasons absent deliberation. I'm unable to overcome this. It ceased to be achievable. I'm unfamiliar with. Those ideations didn't materialize from one incident. They originated via duplication. Perhaps you absorbed them via different individuals. Perhaps you commenced repeating them personally, yet gradually they adhered. Not because they constituted reality, yet because they felt recognizable. Currently envision leveraging that equivalent mechanism to introduce superior ideations. Not theatrical, merely steady. I'm advancing. I can modify. Transformation is transpiring. Distribute them long adequate. Absorb them repeatedly adequate. And they commence feeling intrinsic. The objective isn't excellence. It's development. You're not trying to eliminate every question. You're educating your consciousness which orientation to gravitate. Every evening you duplicate sleep listening, you're reiterating that orientation. You're establishing a structure that persists even whenever the morning is demanding. That's what recurrence generates, solidity. It supplies you something concrete to come back to. And this doesn't require complexity. Choose a concise communication corresponding with who you desire to transform into. Recognize a cadence that experiences serene and steady. Distribute it gently as you succumb to slumber. Not sufficiently noisily to interrupt, merely sufficiently to be manifest. Subsequently execute it once more the subsequent evening and the subsequent. No tension, no demand to overcomplicate. Merely demonstrate up. Specific evenings you'll experience attached to the communication. Different evenings you'll succumb to sleep previously you've absorbed significantly. That confirms itself. What maintains importance is the fact that your consciousness is being subjected to equivalent communication repeatedly. That publicity generates assurance, and assurance represents the foundation of genuine consciousness modification. You're unable to simulate it. You're unable to impose it. You've got to develop into it. And sleep listening delivers a route to accomplish that absent exhausting yourself. Over seasons, you'll commence observing modifications, understated ones. You communicate instead of react. You hesitate previously criticizing yourself. You experience progressively grounded whenever something stressful manifests. You didn't arrive there via unanticipated effort. You arrived there via serene consistency. You rehearsed the ideations you desired to hold and they transformed into your contemporary foundation. That's precisely what it communicates to progress organically. You're not pursuing motivation. You're not attempting to resolve everything without delay. You're selecting superior substance and enabling it to operate while you settle. Development transforms an outcome of the consistency you've generated. And the exceptional component is it persists because it wasn't generated via excitement. It was generated via recurrence. It's uncomplicated to skip the technique whenever you don't observe consequences right away. Yet this isn't concerning quick. It's concerning profound. Genuine modification occurs gradually via constant publicity, via serene discipline, via executing something encouraging despite feeling like it's producing a distinction. Because it consistently is. Therefore don't pursue immediate confirmation. Pursue tendencies. Pursue how you communicate with yourself absent attempting. Pursue how you navigate modest obstacle. Pursue the sensation of harmony that emerges wherever there was previously commotion. Those constitute signals that the recurrence is functioning, that you're turning into another person. Not because you competed tougher, yet because you rehearsed intelligently. There exists something formidable in understanding that whenever you settle, your advancement continues. That whenever your physiology recuperates, your consciousness obtains. That whenever the community is serene, you're turning into increasingly powerful absent strain. That classification of development communicates distinct. It's established, it's steady, it continues. Persist moving forward, persist duplicating. Persist selecting the substance that expresses the living you desire to generate. Grant your evenings to operate for you. Grant your advancement to materialize with simplicity. Grant your consciousness to be configured not by what transpired previously, yet by what you choose to absorb now repeatedly until it transforms who you're genuinely. You don't need to accomplish everything simultaneously. Merely persist absorbing, persist demonstrating up, and rely that this kind of recurrence proceeds precisely wherever you're supposed to traverse. Chapter 9, Release Resistance and Welcome Transformation. Transformation doesn't happen simply because you long for it. It manifests whenever circumstances facilitate it. A significant portion of humanity dedicates their existence to compelling themselves to transform. They pressure, they overexert, they attempt regulating all facets of the procedure. Whenever they neglect to perceive instant outcomes, they imagine something's flawed with them. Yet advancement doesn't reply nicely to tension. It reacts to the atmosphere it's provided. And the honest reality is, the harder you attempt to compel metamorphosis, the harder you obstruct it. Authentic advancement transpires whenever you generate area, whenever you cease clutching so intensely and allow yourself authorization to advance naturally. And that commences with recovery. Recovery doesn't constitute doing nothing. It's offering your consciousness and physiology the opportunity to recalibrate absent becoming thrust. Whenever you settle into advancement, you're not quitting. You're repositioning your method. You're transferring from intensity and in the direction of assurance. Assurance that the effort you've already completed is plenty. Assurance that your consciousness is absorbing. Assurance that your attempts don't need to get monitored continuously. We've gotten educated to think that everything worthwhile arrives from relentless intensity. That in case we're not regularly functioning, we're regressing. Yet that conviction generates burnout. It imprisons individuals in a repetition of personal stress wherever even recovery feels inappropriate. The outcome: tiredness absent meaningful development. You don't require battling yourself into transforming into another individual. You require generating a structure wherever advancement experience is protected adequate to materialize. Settling into advancement indicates understanding whenever to cease pushing. It indicates comprehending that your consciousness acquires more successfully whenever it's not overwhelmed. Whenever you're sleeping, your consciousness isn't dormant. It's functioning differently. A manner that's understated, a manner that's profounder. This represents the excellent instant to enable fresh concepts to establish. Not via tension, via recurrence and serene visibility. Whenever you discontinue compelling advancement, your psychological architecture settles. That quietness communicates to your consciousness it's protected to discharge previous designs. It communicates to your psychological states they don't require perpetually being on guard. You generate room for contemporary ideations to emerge, not from effort, yet from simplicity. This isn't concerning being inactive. It's concerning demonstrating adequate consciousness to function with how advancement truly transpires. Each evening represents a possibility to remind your apparatus what maintains significance. You don't need to rewrite your complete consciousness in one evening. You merely need to transmit its superior orientation, mild language, serene direction, straightforward reminders of who you're turning into. These don't require to get proclaimed. They don't require to get examined. They just require to get absorbed repeatedly adequate to grow to be recognizable. And whenever those ideations turn into component of your consciousness environment, you commence experiencing a distinction. Not in a noticeable, evident manner, yet in modest instances. You hesitate previously responding. You experience somewhat progressively existing. You observe a delicateness in the manner you address yourself. These constitute signs that transformation is transpiring absent difficulty. Contemplate how advancement transpires in characteristics. Vegetation doesn't expand via getting pulled. It expands because the substrate is suitable, the circumstances are wholesome, and patience is permitted to perform its responsibility. The equivalent applies to you. You develop whenever the atmosphere is encouraging, not whenever it's hostile. You develop whenever you're recovered, not whenever you're performing on remainder. And you develop whenever you cease requesting confirmation and commence exercising perseverance. Leveraging your rest to encourage advancement isn't difficult. It merely indicates choosing what category of ideations you desire to transmit into the upcoming morning, what category of convictions you desire to reinforce, what category of electricity you desire to communicate into the upcoming morning. And subsequently softly positioning those matters into your evening. Not via strain, not via requirement, merely via consistency. Lots of people suppose settling indicates losing development. They suppose in case they're unable to execute something energetic, nothing's transpiring. Yet the reverse is frequently genuine. Whenever you settle with goal, the effort you've previously completed starts to consolidate. Concepts attach. Psychological states calm down. Your inner community gets increasingly serene, and in that serene transparency matures. You don't need to thrust harder. You don't need to determine everything this evening. You merely need to permit your apparatus to recuperate. Grant it to settle. granted to establish itself into a location wherever advancement experience is protected. You've expended plenty of moment pursuing transformation. Currently it's the duration to absorb it. This classification of change doesn't consistently communicate productive initially. It doesn't supply the instant fulfillment that accompanies finishing items on a checklist, yet gradually it supplies something superior. Psychological harmony, dependability, a sensation of steady advancement that doesn't crumble underneath strain. That's what settling into advancement generates. A profounder classification of development. And whenever that becomes your residing, everything starts to modify. You terminate computing yourself by the quantity you've performed throughout a morning. You commence focusing on how you're experiencing, how you're ideating, and how existing within your existence. You progress from tension to capacity. Not because you imposed it, yet because you generated room for it. Therefore, whenever you've been experiencing trapped or exhausted or like nothing's functioning, contemplate this. Potentially you're not shattered. Potentially you've only been attempting excessively. Potentially your apparatus is requesting something gentler, something progressively steady. Something that doesn't demand yet another shove. The following instance you approach sleeping, understand that instant earnestly. Decide what variety of electricity you desire to transport with you into recovery. Choose ideations that encourage you. Pay attention to communications that construct you. Reaffirm to yourself that modification is currently transpiring because you've demonstrated up. You've remained consistent and currently you're generating room for all of that to consolidate. And rely this. The deepest advancement doesn't need to get enforced. It just needs to get encouraged, permitted, revered. Whenever you settle into advancement, you terminate getting in your individual pathway. You terminate disrupting the procedure, and you commence turning into who you've perpetually been equipped to be with reduced opposition, decreased pressure, and significantly progressively harmony. Maintain proceeding. Yet this instance, proceed gently. Advancement will encounter you there. Chapter 10, Reshape Your World from Within. Every evening you withdraw from the community's intensity. You disengage from obligations, discussions, and selections. Yet your consciousness doesn't deactivate. It persists performing. It categorizes your psychological responses. It recreates recollections. It organizes experiences. It responds to what it's absorbed, perceived, and experienced. Whilst your physiology recuperates, your interior community continues being dynamic, and that interior community is configuring how you perceive everything the subsequent morning. Suppose you might leverage that interval to guide the procedure. Suppose you might furnish your consciousness superior substance to work with whilst you're asleep. You're capable of. Whenever you do, you commence configuring your reality from the inside outward. Reality isn't exclusively what materializes all around you. It's additionally what manifests inside you. It's the manner you understand the planet. It's precisely how you respond to obstacles, the way you communicate with yourself, the manner you perceive individuals, and precisely how you interact with possibilities. All of that initiates with the convictions you've executed most regularly. And lots of those convictions weren't selected. They got absorbed. Lots of from childhood. Lots of via problems, lots of via strain. Yet despite precisely where they materialized, they're able to get reconstructed. And sleeping grants you a hushed window to commence. You're not required to impose contemporary convictions. You're not required to oppose the outdated ones. You simply need to nourish your consciousness something distinct, something steady, something transparent, something superior. Not for a moment, not periodically, yet repeatedly. The consciousness gets affected by what it absorbs most frequently, specifically whenever it experiences calm, and sleeping delivers that condition nightly. You're able to permit that instant get crammed with strain and internal commotion, or you're able to guide it in the direction of development. A significant portion of individuals attempt to configure their reality throughout the daytime whenever their electricity is minimal and disruptions are substantial. They attempt to think productively whilst they're overburdened. They attempt to concentrate whilst getting yanked in countless directions. That's demanding. Yet throughout sleeping, your consciousness is quieter. The commotion diminishes. Your psychological barriers reduce. And that's whenever contemporary concepts will take root. Not because you're imposing them, yet because you're receptive to them. Visualize sleeping with communications that strengthen harmony, function, and transparency. Visualize waking up not merely experiencing recovered yet psychologically arranged. That difference doesn't come from executing progressively. It transpires from executing something distinct. You're not pursuing excitement. You're generating psychological infrastructure. A framework that your consciousness generates on evening immediately following evening. A framework that commences to reconfigure the manner you experience throughout daily living. Your consciousness doesn't need intensity to modify. It needs recurrence. Mild constant publicity to superior ideations. That's the manner convictions get generated. Not via declaring, via familiarity. You're able to turn out to be acquainted with contemporary concepts just because they've been existing lengthy adequate to experience genuine. Whenever you emerge with superior inner communication, it modifies precisely how you progress by your morning. You communicate with progressively transparency. You generate selections from a progressively serene area. You terminate presuming the worst and commence organizing for what's feasible. That's not merely a sensation modification. That's a reality modification because your consciousness no more perceives the community via a similar filter. Sleep listening permits you to move that filter absent conscious effort. You're not contesting with yourself. You're not attempting to regulate every ideation. You're just generating room for contemporary ones to get absorbed. And the progressively frequently you execute that, the progressively organic they turn out to be. That's the manner interior modification transpires. That's the manner reality commences to modify absent tension. You're not required to write a comprehensive instruction. You're not required to comprehend each range. You simply need to pick a communication that encourages who you desire to turn into. Grant it to activate softly whilst you settle. Remain uncomplicated. Remain steady. The objective isn't to handle all obstacles in one evening. The objective is to generate a superior consciousness environment gradually. Contemplate the manner your contemporary reality was configured. It materialized via narratives. Narratives you've been instructed. Narratives you've duplicated. Narratives you've embraced. Lots of those narratives cease facilitating you. Yet you've absorbed them so frequently they communicate like realities. Yet with objective you're able to launch contemporary narratives, not narratives of strain. Narratives of capability. Narratives that reinforce development absent guilt. Assurance absent commotion, function absent burnout. Whenever you create sleep an occasion for objective substance, you cease watching for the community to configure you. You commence configuring how you interact to the community. And that modification contacts each dimension of existence. Connections experience progressively grounded. Aspirations experience progressively achievable. Self-communication experiences progressively robust. You commence generating your mornings via a superior foundation. Not via leftover strain or apprehension. This technique doesn't demand self-control. It requires perseverance. It requires demonstrating up each evening. Not to execute, yet to enable to permit superior ideations to penetrate. To permit serene communications to consolidate. To permit your consciousness to undergo something distinct and gradually that distinct turns out to be typical. There's no ideal approach to execute this. What maintains significance is the fact that you choose. Choose that your sleeping is able to become progressively then recovery, that it's able to transform component of your development. That it's able to offer objective beyond restoration. You're not required to manage precisely how rapidly the modification happens. You simply need to maintain offering it an opportunity to take shape. This is precisely how you reshape your personality, not via strain. Yet via visibility, becoming visible with the procedure, remaining steady with the communication, staying receptive to the concept that modification is able to happen absent pushing. Whenever you have faith in that your connection with development gets progressively tranquil, you terminate hastening, you commence generating, and the living you desire terminates experiencing out of touch. Each evening constitutes yet another opportunity to rehearse this, yet another opportunity to gently move your convictions, yet another opportunity to communicate to the component of you that's nonetheless developing. You're not required to contemplate. You're not required to be excellent. You simply need to be manifest. Grant the words communicate for you whilst you sleep. Grant your consciousness absorb what it requires. Grant your physiology recuperate whilst your ideations reshape themselves into something that encourages your trajectory. You've expended sufficient duration waiting for transformation to happen externally. Currently is the opportunity to modify what's transpiring internally. Quietly, repeatedly, gently. Each evening transforms a hushed donation to a distinct manner of ideating. Each morning transforms an expression of that hushed evolution. Reality doesn't change from a sole impressive minute. It modifies via modest duplicated communications. Sleep grants you a window to distribute those communications absent opposition, absent disruption, absent strain. Leverage it, have faith in it, and grant yourself authorization to configure your interior community whilst everything else remains serene. You're not requesting additional duration. You merely need to leverage the duration you're previously utilizing in a manner that encourages the individual you're turning into. And that commences this evening. The end.